leadership literature is filled with fluffy, superficial content that lacks substance and scientific rigor. Sense of leadership research refers to common theoretical, methodological, and interpretation errors that compromise the integrity, reliability, and applicability of leadership research findings. In my previous videos, I introduced sin number 1, conflating behavior with perception, sin number 2, circular reasoning, and sin number 3, mislabeling leadership. Today, I'll discuss sin number 4, lack of problematization. What does problematization mean? As the name suggests, it means finding problems in existing literature. The key is that problematization goes beyond simply identifying gaps in existing literature. It is not enough to say, no one has studied X topic, or my study will fill this gap. This type of gap-spotting approach is prevalent in most of the leadership research literature. For example, you want to study sensemaking. The theoretical construct of the research is obviously sensemaking. To justify your research, you might say, previous literature focused on sensemaking in X context. For example, car manufacturers or the merging of two companies. But no one has studied sensemaking in Y context. For example, in the public administration agency, like a state education agency, taking over chronically low-performing public schools. This gap-spotting justification is a classic example of gap-spotting. You're not challenging anything. You simply applied and extended sensemaking to a new context. It's like the existing literature says we can eat an apple in the morning, but it does not say anything about apple eating in the afternoon. It is possible that we can eat an apple all day long, including in the afternoon. You conduct a research study that says we can eat an apple in the afternoon as well. You did not do anything wrong in this type of research. It's just that the implication of your research is very limited. If you challenge the apple eating theory and design and conduct a study that says we cannot eat an apple in the afternoon, that's problematization. To problematize, we need to critically examine and challenge the fundamental assumptions of current theories and understandings. This means going beyond the simple identification of unaddressed areas or gaps in the literature. Instead, we interrogate the very foundation upon which existing theories are built. For example, instead of merely stating that sensemaking has not been studied in the context of public administration, a problematizing approach may question the very definition and application of sensemaking in different organizational contexts. Thus, the construct of sensemaking assume a level of organizational coherence and stability that does not exist in public administration. Are there processes of sensemaking fundamentally different in public sector organizations compared to private sector ones due to different bureaucratic structures and stakeholder accountability? Consider another example in leadership research and organizational science. Organizational culture is often conceptualized as a set of shared values, beliefs, and norms that influence the behavior of organizational members. Traditional approaches to study organizational culture typically assume that those cultural elements are stable and uniform across the organization. However, a problematizing approach would question those assumptions by exploring the potential for subcultures and cultural fragmentation. Thus, the assumption of a unified organizational culture overlooks the diversity of experiences and perspectives among different departments or groups in the organization. Are there conflicting values or norms that may lead to tension or reduced organizational performance? And thus, this traditional view account for the dynamic nature of culture, which can evolve rapidly in response to internal and external pressures and changes in personnel. By challenging the assumption of cultural homogeneity, we can investigate how subcultures in an organization interact and influence overall organizational performance. This could lead to more nuanced theories that better capture the complexity of organizational behavior. For example, examining the impact of subcultures on innovation may reveal that diverse cultural elements can either nurture creativity or create barriers to collaboration, depending on how they are managed. Moreover, problematizing the static view of organizational culture could inspire research into how cultures change over time and how leaders can effectively navigate and influence those changes. This problematization approach could lead to the development of strategies that are more adaptable and responsive to the fluid nature of organizational environments, ultimately contributing to more effective leadership practices. Let's look at the literature on ethical leadership. To problematize ethical leadership, we need to first identify the fundamental assumptions. The challenging part is that the fundamental assumptions are usually not explicitly stated in the literature. One needs to carefully analyze and interpret the implicit beliefs and frameworks that underlie current theories and research. After careful analysis and a lot of thinking, observation, and reflection, we may identify three fundamental assumptions of ethical leadership. First, ethical leadership is universally beneficial. Does this assumption hold true across different cultural and organizational contexts? Ethical standards and behaviors may vary significantly across cultures. For example, transparency and openness may be valued in Western contexts, but seen differently in more hierarchical cultures. The second fundamental assumption of ethical leadership is that ethical leaders are inherently moral and trustworthy. But are people who exhibit ethical leadership truly guided by an inherent moral character? In what ways can situational pressures lead ethical leaders to act unethically? From our observation, we can see that situational factors like organizational pressure or personal stress can influence even well-intentioned leaders, leading to ethical lapses. This phenomenon is often referred to as the Lucifer effect, a term popularized by psychologist Philip Zimbardo. The Lucifer effect explains how good people can turn evil due to the influence of situational factors, a concept illustrated by the metaphor of the bad barrel system. In this context, the barrel represents the organizational environment, which can corrupt the individuals, the good apples, in it. According to Philip Zimbardo, the 7 signs of a bad barrel system, which can lead to good people engaging in unethical or harmful behavior, are: first, mindless first step. People begin by engaging in seemingly minor unethical behavior, which gradually escalates. The initial step often seems insignificant, but sets the stage for more significant transgressions. For example, minor acts of dishonesty, like padding an expense report from $20 to $50, can desensitize individuals to larger ethical breaches, eventually leading to major fraud or corruption. Second, dehumanization of others. People in the bad barrel system start to see others as less than human, making it easier to mistreat them. This dehumanization can manifest through language, labeling, and ideological justifications. For example, referring to a rival group with derogatory terms can strip them of their humanity, making aggressive behaviors against them seem justified. In war times, enemies are often dehumanized to rationalize violence and atrocities. In a competitive organizational environment, employees may refer to colleagues from rival departments as idiots or incompetents. This derogatory language can strip them of their humanity, making it easier to justify mistreatment or unfair competition. Department A may use aggressive tactics to undermine Department B, seeing them as obstacles rather than collaborators. Similarly, during organizational restructuring, management may dehumanize lower-level employees by referring to them as resources to be cut, rather than individuals with families and lives, thereby rationalizing layoffs without considering the human impact. Third, de-individuation of self. De-individuation refers to a psychological state where we lose our sense of personal identity and responsibility, often feeling anonymous in a group. This de-individuation can lead to behaviors that we may not normally exhibit if we were acting alone, because the usual social and moral constraints are diminished. Anonymity can reduce self-awareness and the fear of consequences, leading to behaviors such as vandalism or aggressive acts in a mob setting. In the workplace, during an organizational-wide anonymous feedback session, employees may feel a sense of anonymity and de-individuation. This can lead to excessively harsh or unfair criticism that they would not normally express if their identity were known. Fourth, diffusion of personal responsibility. It means responsibility for unethical actions is spread across members of a group, reducing the feeling of individual accountability. This diffusion of personal responsibility allows us to justify our behavior by thinking that everyone is doing it. In organizational scandals, employees may engage in unethical behavior, believing that the collective nature of the behavior absolves individual guilt. Fifth, blind obedience to authority. It means people follow orders from authority figures without questioning the morality of the directives. This obedience can lead to unethical behaviors simply because an authority figure endorses them. Historical examples include the obedience seen in the military hierarchies, where soldiers commit atrocities because they are just following orders. The Stanley Milgram experiment famously demonstrated this, showing that people are willing to administer painful electric shocks to others when instructed by an authority figure. 6. Unethical conformity to group norms. We conform to the behaviors and expectations of our group, even when those norms are unethical. The desire to fit in and be accepted by the group can override our personal moral judgments. For example, in an organizational environment, if the prevailing culture endorses aggressive sales tactics that border on deception, new employees may adopt these practices to align with their colleagues and supervisors despite personal reservations. 7. Passive tolerance of evil through inaction or indifference. People become passive bystanders, failing to act against unethical practices, either out of fear, indifference, or the belief that someone else will intervene. This tolerance allows unethical behaviors to persist and escalate. In scenarios of workplace bullying, harassment, or corruption, we may remain silent, thinking that it is not our place to intervene or fear retaliation, thereby enabling the unethical behavior to continue unchecked. Let's refresh our memory of the 7 signs of a bad barrel system. Mindless first step. dehumanization of others, de-individuation of self, diffusion of personal responsibility, blind obedience to authority, uncritical conformity to group norms, and passive tolerance of evil through inaction or indifference. Those 7 signs of the bed barrel system illustrate how situational and systemic factors can corrupt individuals, leading to unethical behavior even among those who may otherwise consider themselves moral and ethical. The third fundamental assumption of ethical leadership is that ethical leadership results in positive organizational outcomes. Is this always true? Can ethical leadership sometimes lead to unintended negative consequences? There are scenarios where strict adherence to ethical principles could slow decision-making processes or create conflicts in ambiguous situations. For example, a leader who insists on complete transparency in all dealings may face delays due to the time required to ensure full disclosure and compliance with ethical standards. Problematizing ethical leadership, the construct of pro-organizational unethical behavior starts to rise. Pro-organizational unethical behavior refers to behaviors that are unethical but are carried out with the intention of benefiting the organization. Examples of pro-organizational unethical behaviors are falsifying reports to meet performance targets, changing student test scores to meet school performance metrics, misleading stakeholders to maintain a positive image, or cutting corners to save costs. Pro-organizational unethical behavior problematizes ethical leadership by highlighting the complex interplay between ethical standards and organizational goals. While ethical leadership emphasizes moral behavior and integrity, pro-organizational unethical behavior exposes how leaders may rationalize unethical behavior for the perceived good of the organization. This contradiction challenges the assumption that ethical leadership universally leads to positive organizational outcomes. It suggests that in the pursuit of organizational success, even leaders with good intentions may resort to unethical behaviors, thereby complicating the narrative that ethical leadership is inherently beneficial. One more thing I'd like to add about the lack of problematization in leadership research is that some studies are guided by paradigms like postmodernism and critical theory, which forcefully critique existing theories. Now, some researchers may argue that they are problematizing the existing literature, but are they truly doing so? Is it possible that their so-called problematization is often secondary, in the sense that they are more or less ready-made by towering thinkers such as Jean Baudrillard, Michel Foucault, John Rawls, Derek Bell, and Kimberly Crenshaw on a particular topic? While researchers rely heavily on existing critiques, their research becomes derivative instead of original. It is more of an application of existing critiques rather than an original novel critique. This can lead to a situation where the critique appears ready-made, borrowed from established thinkers without significant new insights or challenges to the field. This prepackaged approach aims to defend or reinforce a preferred position rather than offer new points of departure. For example, a researcher may adopt a Foucauldian perspective to analyze power dynamics in an organization. While this perspective provides critical insights, it may also limit the analysis to predefined notions of power and control, potentially missing new, emergent aspects of leadership dynamics. Perspectives with a ready-made stance often have stock questions and puzzles about it, such as the feminist questions, what about women and social networks? What about a gendered concept of narrative, and so on? While those research questions are important, they can sometimes lead to predictable analysis that reinforce existing paradigms rather than challenging the fundamental assumptions of them. In an article titled Generating Research Questions Through Problematization, published in Academy of Management Review in 2011, the authors Elvison and Sandberg argue that those prepackaged problematization attempt apply rather than challenge the literature they follow, thereby mainly reproducing, not challenging the assumptions underlying their own perspectives. In this video, I point out sin number 4 in leadership research, the lack of problematization. To uncover new angles and ask good research questions, we need to challenge the underlying assumptions of existing theories and understanding. Engaging in problematization moves research beyond incremental addition to existing literature and opens up new lines of inquiry that can lead to significant theoretical breakthroughs. This is how we can transform our understanding of leadership and contribute to the development of more robust leadership research.